Vivi l'unghia di oggi.
Good morning, everybody. Nice to see people here so bright and early on a Saturday morning. You have to apologize, I'm starting to lose my voice because I've had so many fantastic conversations over the last few days here in Perugia. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm Phil Chetwynd. I'm the Global News Director of AFP, the international news agency. And I've got just a fantastic panel here to talk about this really interesting subject. I'll introduce them in just a minute. But I just want to sort of reflect on why we're here and what we're going to talk about. Twitter was, an exceptional part of the journalistic landscape. It's, we look back with great nostalgia on this thing that was a mixture between a sort of giant fax machine, content builder, contact builder, and just a place where you could have these so-called conversations. So for AFP, as a massive global breaking news service, it was at the core of everything we did. We told all our journalists they had to be on Twitter. All of them had to promote their content. All of them were using it to get sources. All of them were using it to follow breaking news. That's our core being, So for us, it was a place of where news breaks. That's where we needed to be. We needed to be on Twitter. That was sort of probably for 10 years, all those really big stories, the Arab Spring, Iran, every time we had breaking news, the Paris attacks, it happened on Twitter and we followed it through Twitter. You would have seen it on every screen in the newsroom. We also had a commercial relationship with Twitter, which we used to fact check on Twitter in Latin America. So we were part of the sort of curation system of keeping Twitter sort of clean and healthy, as it were. So that's where we were at that time. So I'll introduce my panel. It's a sort of context of what it was. I'll introduce the panel. We've got Mariana Spring, who's the BBC's first disinformation correspondent, I believe, and probably only. I'm not sure anyone's going to do the job after you because you've had such a challenging time. She's done a whole series of fantastic documentaries and podcasts related to disinformation, with particular some focus on Twitter and Mr. Elon Musk. And I just sort of leave you with one statistic, which was internal BBC data from 2023 showed that 80% of all online abuse directed at the BBC was directed at Mariana. Which is just astonishing. And she has a new book called Among the Trolls, Notes from the Disinformation War. Zoe Schiffer, managing editor of Platformer. If anyone had wanted to see the kind of chaos that's been happening at Twitter over the last sort of year and a half or X, Zoe's reporting on Platformer has just been at the core of that. Amazing sources inside Twitter, amazing stories about the dysfunction. Which you can also see in a wonderful new book, which I recommend, called Extremely Hardcore Inside Elon Musk's Twitter. And finally, Aaron Rupar, who's a political journalist with a really successful newsletter called Public Notice, who has 900,000 followers on Twitter. I think he's done 130,000 tweets, I think, yeah. And is still going.
I haven't pulled the numbers on that. So.
and is still going really strong. So I wanted to just kick off the conversation just by asking each of the panelists what Twitter, not what X, what Twitter meant to them and how they used it and what was the point of it for you. This is everything pre-Elon Musk.
Thank you so much. So for me, I think Twitter used to be, I spend far too much of my time investigating bad stuff on social media, so hate, algorithms, disinformation. I was still doing that pre-Elon Musk, and I found that Twitter was a place where it was important to exist to be able to investigate that. I think the thing that I really used to like about Twitter was the ability for people to get in touch with me. So a lot of the podcast investigations I do were people sending me messages, reaching out, telling me about their experiences or pointing out content that they were concerned about. And that was really important for me. That doesn't quite exist in the same way anymore, which I'll talk about in a bit. And I think, I've always been a big believer in not spending too much time on Twitter and being out and about and going out and meeting people and kind of really humanizing the impact that disinformation, hate, polarization can have. But it definitely used to feel less trolly for me. And that feels funny saying that because there were quite a lot of trolls when I was there before, but now it's a sort of different kettle of fish, as they say.
Yeah, Twitter for me was both a news gathering tool, but also an audience building tool. I started in 2017 when I was at Think Progress, which is a publication that no longer exists, that was based out of DC, covering the Trump administration. And I used short form video on Twitter to rapidly build an audience. And I still do a lot of video coverage of US politics. And eventually my following got to the point when I was at Vox where it became enticing to go independent and launch a newsletter, which is called Public Notice, where I still cover US politics. But I was one of the journalists in December 2022 who was banned by Elon Musk, essentially for being critical of his management of the platform. And so that really illustrated to me that it could all be taken away, instantaneously. But I still use Twitter, as my preeminent platform to cover the news and to be in touch with sources. So even though it's degraded from what it was, back in the Twitter days, X is still something that I spend a lot of time on.
Yeah, I think like a lot of you, I had kind of a tortured relationship with Twitter. It was really important for finding sources and stories, and it acted almost as an assignment editor. And at the same time, it could feel very unruly. I was on a preschool tour, I remember, when a tweet went really viral, and it just felt like you couldn't really tell where the tide was going to turn and if you would get more stories from it or there would just be an absolute torrent of abuse that came from it. And yet we all had to be on it and spend, I think, an inordinate amount of time on it. And so there's been a certain amount of relief in being off of it, and I also think it's made reporting genuinely more difficult in some ways.
So if I turn to your X habit now, you're off it.
Yeah, I haven't been on, I will go on occasionally to kind of see what's going on because there are certain communities that have stayed on X after the Elon Musk era, but I personally decided to stop posting entirely after Elon Musk's decision to kind of go head-to-head with the journalism industry became really apparent, and to me it felt like staying on the platform was legitimizing his campaign in a way.
Mariana, what's your X habit now?
Perhaps in a kind of similar way to Zoe, I use it a lot less. I post a lot less. I kind of just post when I have something coming out. Maybe it's a podcast series or an investigation. I'm greeted with a lot more abuse than before, or perhaps that abuse is more prominent than it was before because the accounts sending it have blue ticks. And it's harder for people to get in touch with me because I don't want to and haven't bought a blue tick. And the people who want to get in touch with me often haven't either. So I end up actually relying on other social media platforms. But I still have to be there because, a bit like a kind of political journalist in the UK, for example, not being in the House of Commons, you do have to, be able to investigate the space that you're covering.
It's still there, yeah. I would say so. AFP too. TweetDeck and the whole Twitter process is absolutely at the core of breaking news. So, we're still there. But nobody's gaining any followers. The algorithm has gone bananas. So, things are coming your way. There's no rhyme or reason as to what's coming your way. And I think probably something we'll discuss a bit later, there's clearly an active promotion of people who are completely nuts, which in a breaking news scenario, be it Gaza or whatever it may be, creates a real information nightmare, I think. So for us, you know, it's again, we're still there, but we're sort of posing that questions about how we go forward as an organization. Zoe, I think I'm just trying to understand how we got here. You know, there was this platform that everybody loved. It was complex. Let's not be, you know, as you said, we've all said, it wasn't some, you know, without its problems, but it was something that everyone loved, and it had a feeling to it, had a community. What happened once Elon Musk bought it, and also why the hell did he buy it? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think sussing out his intentions is still really complicated. What we know is that Elon Musk had $10 billion burning a hole in his pocket from selling a bunch of Tesla stock, and he is not someone who likes to, you know, lay well enough alone. And so he thought about the products that he really loved, and Twitter was one of them. And his major concern in early 2022 was that Twitter was overrun with this amorphous virus he calls the woke mind virus, which I basically translate to content moderation. And he wanted to get involved and see if he could turn it around. There were a few kind of key decisions that he took special offense to. One of them was Twitter's decision to ban Donald Trump's account following the January 6th riots in Washington, D.C. And you know, he decided to buy up a bunch of shares and get quite involved, make an offer to take it private, but then he really waffled. He wasn't sure whether he wanted it to be his core focus. I think one anecdote that I talk about in the book is that just kind of speaks to how random and impulsive this decision was, is that he'd gone back and forth from April to basically October deciding, was he going to buy it, was he going to not, was he going to sue to try and get out of the deal? And the afternoon of the deal close, he decides he's going to close it, and then he realizes he's $500 million short. And there's this kind of mad dash. He actually asks Twitter's board of directors if he can just borrow the money from them because it's basically his money anyway, and they're like, that's not how the law works, sir, no. And because it's Elon Musk, it all works out. The money is wired to him from God knows who, and he ends up buying the platform. But I think to say that there was a large strategy in place is an absolute folly. And I think we've seen time and again since he bought the platform that he acts on whim and he acts on impulse. And while his impulses when he is building Tesla and SpaceX has actually been pretty on point a lot of the time, Twitter is just a different ballgame. It requires a level of empathy and an understanding of human emotion that Elon Musk fundamentally lacks, and I would say his impulses have led him astray.
And so concretely, how did this mess that we have now, the promotion of, you know, let's be honest, anti-Semitism, racism, hate, promotion of it, I mean, you know, we get it in our timelines, even though we have no interaction with these people. There's a crypto guy who runs a breaking news service who just doesn't know anything about journalism that, you know, consistently gets promoted as, you know, sort of a source of breaking news. How did this chaos actually, how was it created? What's going on there? What's happening in the back office? There
have been a lot of decisions that kind of led to the current state of affairs, but I think one of the primary ones was Elon's decision to allow anyone with $8 to buy a blue check mark. So previously, Twitter's verification system, like I'm sure many of you know, was incredibly flawed, but it did kind of, we had this implicit understanding that if someone was verified, they were an important and maybe a credible person across media, politics, sports, etc. And Elon Musk took offense to that. He called it a lords and peasants system. And he particularly took offense to the fact that basically any journalist, even with a very small following, could get verified within like 24 hours after joining, you know, a mainstream publication. And this was something that he wanted to change. Now, right away after he buys Twitter, the trust and safety team at the company warns him very explicitly in this 10-page letter that if he allows anyone to pay for verification, the platform is going to be overrun with impersonators. And he basically refuses to listen to them and charges ahead. And so we see the very first product decision that he makes is to roll out this relaunch of Twitter Blue. And the exact fears that the trust and safety team have come to life almost immediately. And what we've seen now is that the algorithm amplifies blue check accounts. And rather than amplifying expertise, it now amplifies basically tacit endorsers of Elon Musk. And so when we see breaking news events, we see people actually incentivized to share viral misinformation because previously there was an ad sharing relationship where you could get paid if your post did well and got a lot of engagement, and that meant that the goal was to speak loudly and get as many eyeballs as possible, not necessarily to be as accurate as you could be.
And in part of that system, what also became clear was obviously the dismantling of all the moderation, firing of all the people involved in trust and safety, and the sort of almost the replacement of that by one chief moderator, Elon Musk. Aaron, explain how you suddenly ended up being moderated by Musk. What happened?
I posted a link to the Elon Jet Facebook account. You might remember this, that there was an account on Twitter that used publicly available information to track Elon's private jet. And that account was banned by Elon, even though earlier in 2022, he had explicitly said that account, he was so committed to free speech that he would allow that account to exist on Twitter, even though he claimed, somewhat dubiously, I believe, that it was endangering his safety. And so when that account was banned from Twitter, I posted a tweet simply linking to the Facebook page for Elon Jet and noting that even though it was banned on Twitter, it was still alive on Facebook. And I think it was the next day I tried to pull up my feed and I had a notice fixed atop the feed that said that my account had been permanently suspended. And it actually took me about an hour, maybe 2 hours, with help from some reporters who were reporting the story of myself and other journalists being banned to figure out what had happened. I, at first, was completely dumbfounded as to why I had been banned. I had posted some newsletters critical of what Elon was doing to the platform. You might remember that the first weekend of his ownership, he posted a homophobic conspiracy theory about the Paul Pelosi attack. Paul Pelosi is the husband of then Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. Someone basically did a home invasion, and he amplified a conspiracy theory that this was rooted in some sort of homosexual tryst that Paul Pelosi was having. And so I did a newsletter criticizing him for that, and another one that was criticizing him for other changes that he was making. And so at first I assumed that that must have been, I was caught up in some dragnet of people who had been critical of him who were banned. Only later did I figure out that it was because I had posted a link to the Elon Jet account. So of course I was very dismayed by this. I had spent a decade basically grinding to build the following that I had. I then leveraged that to go independent. So this was basically my livelihood on the line. And then it became clear very quickly after I was banned that it was actually going to work out for the best. Elon posted a poll asking if myself and the other journalists should be reinstated. The results of that poll, even though it was on Elon's page, so you'd think maybe his fans would want us to be banned, the results were majority to reinstate us. That happened a couple days later, and in the meantime, I had a huge surge of newsletter subscribers, and so it ended up being ultimately a good thing. In the end, it kind of raised my profile on the platform, but one thing that it did is it really forced me to consider diversifying, the platforms that I'm on. So these days, I post on Blue Sky and Threads. I was posting regularly on Post News, which I just learned yesterday is actually folding, which is unfortunate. But I've really tried to gain toeholds on different platforms because obviously, Twitter cannot be relied on going forward to be what it was 10 years ago when it was kind of the central hub for all journalists, to gather news.
Yeah, and so this idea of this sort of overlord sitting at the top, Mariana, you've had that too, right? I mean, your journalism, what you do, how you've looked at the issues at Twitter, at X, and the chief twit himself, I don't know, I suppose doxing you or yeah.
I feel like this is becoming some kind of like therapy session where we all go, oh yeah, this is what happened to me. I mean, all of this and actually listening to you both talk just makes me think about this very complex, and I think particularly when we're talking about X now, problematic discussion around freedom of expression, because Elon Musk's whole thing is about protecting freedom of expression all the time, and yet we're here as journalists talking about the way that we are targeted for trying to, in your case, kind of critique what Elon Musk was doing. In my case, it involved investigating what was unfolding at then Twitter for Panorama, which is the BBC's flagship investigative programme. And I tracked down various insiders. I'd also spoken to people in the UK who'd been harmed by hate, disinformation, other content on Twitter since Elon Musk's takeover, and noticed a marked difference in the way they were experiencing that. That included, for example, a rape survivor who'd experienced huge volumes of misogynistic hate after the takeover. I might have replied Elon Musk. I didn't hear back. I might have replied. I followed up again. Didn't hear back. Requested an interview. Even did a poll or a vote to see if he'd do an interview with me. He obviously did not. And this investigation went out. And the picture at the top of it, the headline was along the lines of, insiders say that Musk's Twitter can't protect users from disinformation and hate anymore. And there was lots of evidenced experience from users and from those who'd been on the inside. The picture at the top of the investigation was a picture of me. And within sort of several hours of it having been published, Elon Musk had shared it. He said something like, "Sorry for turning Twitter from nurturing paradise into a place that has trolls," with a little troll emoji, and then various other things in the thread. Obviously, that wasn't what we'd said at all. We'd quite clearly highlighted there were problems with hate and disinformation pre-Elon Musk. That did not matter, though. And because my picture was at the top, I just became, as I am often, but an absolute lightning rod for hate and disinformation and a kind of pile on that. Perhaps since then I've experienced ones as bad, but at that point it was probably one of the worst ones I'd experienced. And for me, it just confirmed everything I just exposed within about 10 minutes. It was like, well, exactly what we've just said. You're proving that this is kind of how it now works, and the way that kind of cycle of hate happens on X now. A big account takes aim at someone. They don't necessarily share something abusive. They just decide to name them or share a picture of them or make a comment about them, which is their right to do so. But then there are a kind of army of what I often refer to as the shock troops, kind of trolls, who then go after you, and they're the people sending the really kind of extreme abuse. And I should say I'm fortunate to not receive racist abuse or homophobic abuse or other kinds of hate. Mine was kind of largely misogyny, but there are all kinds of people I hear from on a regular basis. And I was kind of thinking through all the kind of journalism I've done since then, and everything from I was doing a podcast series called Why Do You Hate Me?, investigating extraordinary cases of online hate and the wave of misogyny and racism that some women in the UK have been facing. Again, this same kind of cycle unfolding, and the people who are perpetrating it, not in this case Elon Musk, are able to benefit from doing so because they grow their following, they have bought a blue tick, they're driving people towards their whatever they want to drive people towards, maybe their newsletter or their podcast, and the women at the centre of this, or the people at the centre of this, their freedom of expression is inhibited because they don't feel like they can exist on X anymore, on Twitter anymore, and that to me seems a problem, along with the fact that journalists trying to hold to account a very powerful and rich person are not able to do so without being targeted with hate, which to me doesn't seem like what I would consider protecting freedom of expression.
I think, can I just add to that? I think also it's so important to contextualize what Mariana is talking about under, this is a playbook that has been used since Gamergate, basically this campaign that ostensibly was about ethics in gaming journalism, but was so clearly about silencing female journalists, primarily online. And when we look at the way that Elon Musk and his fans are explaining why they are going after certain journalists who are critical of him and what he is doing, the whole guise is that, this is about, making the press more credible or elevating credible journalists and silencing these other ones. And I think we all need to see very clearly that that is not what this is about. This is not about ethics in journalism. It's about powerful people being very nervous that the press, journalists, independent journalists, and mainstream journalists alike can write a story that in some way scares off advertisers or harms their business interests.
Thanks, Zoe. I wanted to come back just on, Mariana, interesting making this point about how big accounts sort of, go after people. And of course, there's no bigger account on X than Elon Musk. And in your book, it's just sort of fascinating how much energy is focused at X in, bigging up his account and making him bigger. It's like a sort of almost caricature of a Peter Sellers, film where, some mad dictators, trying to take over the world. It comes across that way, almost cartoon-like. This chief twit at the top, who's now got this massive platform to abuse, to just, and especially the media.
Yeah, I try not to spend too much time psychoanalyzing Elon Musk because he's also never talked to me and probably never will. But I think it is quite apparent that, as a child, he was quite unpopular and harassed by his peers. And it's very striking that today he kind of gets to be permanently the most popular person, the kind of prom king online, no matter what. And now he's able to kind of pull the strings to ensure that he's always the most popular account. And I think he's genuinely quite addicted to that attention. You know, you hear from people in the office that say at 3 a.m. he's going to the bathroom, he's scrolling his phone, he's in a meeting, he's scrolling his phone. Like, he's really constantly online in that way. And no matter what he says, he kind of gets this instantaneous rush of affirmation. And I think that that's pretty intoxicating for anyone, but certainly anyone who can buy almost anything in the world except kind of the adoration of the public.
Yeah, I mean, so I think we agree on the scale of the toxicity, but most of us are still there. Most news organizations are still there and still try to navigate our way through big breaking news on the platform. October 7, the events in Israel, where, you know, it was just a horrific sort of mess of racism, false things, false videos, you know, but people were still navigating that as a tool that was part of the coverage. Aaron, you know, you probably looked at some, you know, big breaking news stories in recent months. I mean, yeah. There's still some value there, right? Yeah. But it's hard, right, to extract it, right?
Yeah, I think that there is value still in using X, or, you know, Twitter, as I still tend to call it, for breaking news. And, you know, one tip that I have kind of developed as I've been navigating this is I used to keep my list of people that I was following pretty tight, under 1,000 or so, but now I'm up, you know, easily over 3,000 accounts that I follow. And the reason that I've done that is because I want to have a list of trusted sources, you know, whether they be experts, you know, if I'm following something on the war in Ukraine, people who are covering that, who I trust, open source intelligence people. So when there is big breaking news, I can go right to my feed of people that I'm following and get the news there first. And then from there, if I want to do a search, you know, you have to be extremely skeptical of things that you're seeing in your search results for reasons that we've talked about, where there's incentives to spread disinformation. You know, there are people who have blue checks who are not credible sources. But I think to the extent that you can avoid the algorithmic feed, you're going to be well served by that. And so I use my following list. I filter my notifications, so I only see notifications basically from people that I follow. And so in instances where there have been pile-ons on me for something that I've posted or tweeted, oftentimes I might not even see it unless I start getting DMs or something like that, because I'm only getting notifications from the people that I follow. And I don't follow Elon Musk, so I try to avoid seeing his posts to the extent possible. And I notice that when I pull up the For You feed, which is the algorithmic feed, it's basically rage bait. It's, you know, people, conservatives who are saying provocative things. It's a lot of Elon posts. And so, you know, I try to the extent possible to avoid that. But, you know, if you still are on X and you're still wanting to use it as a journalist or just a news consumer for breaking news, I would suggest putting together a list of people that you are following who are credible, using that as your first point of contact for breaking news events. And then from there, if you want to search and find posts from people that you are not following, you can do that, but be very skeptical of what you're seeing, because there are bad actors who are intentionally spreading disinformation.
Mariana, how are you looking at Twitter and X as a breaking news tool? And how's the BBC? Because again, like AFP, you know, it's just a key part of the, you know, the news gathering, global news gathering process, especially on breaking news. So how do you look at it now? Do you still use it as a breaking news tool?
I have to say, I think I probably use it much. You know, the BBC, like AFP, are still on X and still kind of regularly share our content with mixed reception. I tend to use it. I was just thinking of kind of just all of the situations that have unfolded even over the past 6 months, where there is something huge happening in the world, whether it's, you know, the attacks in Israel by Hamas on October the 7th and the war in Gaza, or whether it's the stabbings that happened in Sydney on Saturday. The way that those events unfold, I mean, I feel like I'm sort of like picking up the pieces of the kind of the poor people that end up being collateral damage when these kinds of things unfold. So I think of the war in Gaza, there were 2 little 4-year-old boys. I reported on the way that they'd both been killed. One was called Omar. He was Palestinian, living just outside of Gaza City. The other was Omer. He was living in a kibbutz not very far in Israel. Both of them were killed in those kind of opening weeks of the war. And yet, on social media, and particularly on X, their killings were denied. People were suggesting Omar was a doll, that he wasn't real. People were suggesting Omer was an actor, he never really existed. And the family and friends of those 4-year-olds were having to kind of deal with the consequences of those false allegations, which were causing really serious harm to them. And X sort of just moves on. Everyone starts talking about something else. But actually, I think Elon Musk likes to position himself as the person who's sticking up for the everyman, sticking up for the person who wants to speak their mind. But I constantly am speaking to real people who are being really harmed by the kinds of content unfolding. The same with the Sydney stabbings. People might have seen there were lots of false accusations about who'd carried out that stabbing, one of which was levelled at a 20-year-old man called Benjamin Cohen, and there was lots of anti-Semitic hate as well as lots of Islamophobic hate triggered by false allegations it was an Islamic attack. And so I think it's really important to kind of understand that while X is small and certainly smaller in its user base than Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, it still has this really sort of outsourced influence when big stuff happens. We're looking ahead to this massive election year. I've been speaking to people who've been harmed by AI-generated audio or AI-generated images that are misleading voters in some way in the US or the UK or otherwise. This stuff all has really serious real-world consequences. And yet when you try and write a reply X about any of it, you are greeted right now with an automatic out-of-office email. I've replied them, 10 times over the past 4 months. I'm sure you'd both agree. Zoe would definitely agree with this. And just no one responds to you. And that is amazing for kind of journalism where you're trying to hold a social media company to account.
Yeah. Although it's better than the poop emoji, which was the auto response for a very long time.
It's hard to even know how to respond to the poop emoji. And has the BBC then also changed its sort of policy or its guidelines to journalists about how it uses Twitter X as a breaking news tool, as a contact building tool?
I think that kind of in general, the BBC sort of applies the same editorial principles that it kind of always had, editorial policy principles to X still. Journalists haven't been told to leave the platform. People still very much exist on it, as do the big accounts. We've not, I personally haven't bought a blue tick, but our accounts have those little gold, the BBC ones have those little gold ticks, some of them, which I'm still kind of slightly perplexed as to what that actually does or means. And I think kind of in general, I think I said this to you when we were chatting before the panel, but I think that for now, while we all exist on X, it will continue to kind of rage on in this way, and particularly because it's the place where still, if you are, a prime minister or a president or a government, you kind of put or a police service or whoever, you put your statement out there. So continually, kind of everyone still has to turn to these places as the reference point of, oh, that's what's going on in the world. And I think until that changes, it will. And I should say that. I'm sure there are people who love using X and get lots of positive stuff out of it. And, there are important arguments about the way social media companies are held to account and transparency and the way that their policies work and moderation works. And, some of those things are very valid to raise and interrogate and to talk about. But the way that this has all unfolded has seemingly caused a fair bit of harm to people. And Elon Musk will constantly say, there's no evidence to support that idea. But actually, he need only kind of Google some of my stuff for that evidence.
Well, yeah. Listening to you, Mariana, the more I'm struck by the sort of, I guess, moral quandary for the media, and picking up probably on Zoe's position, is that you can say that Musk at this point is an enemy of journalism. This is someone who I was struck by a tweet he did the other day saying. I was laughing about something, saying, I can't believe some people still believe what they read in the media, for which the question underneath was, well, so where do you get your information? So, so I guess this is, if I come to the question of the panel, should we stay, should we go? Do we have a moral obligation to leave? Because this guy is attacking our industry, the fabric of what we do. And Zoe, I know you have an opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've made my own decision, and I hesitate to tell people, to take the same moral stance, especially when, like, I've moved off X, but I'm on Threads, which is owned by Meta. So it's like these moral decisions are all pretty fraught. But I would say that beyond the moral question, my question for all of you would be, why would you continue to invest in a closed platform that's owned by a very erratic individual who can take away all of the work you've done at any moment, as he did to Aaron? I think that there are other alternatives, and one of the beautiful things about those alternatives is that they are decentralized, and they carry with them this promise that when you leave Threads, when you leave Blue Sky or Mastodon, you can take with you the content that you've built, the followers, and the people that you follow, and so you're not rebuilding from scratch every single time. Right now, that's still an idea, it's still a promise, and yet I think if we're going to hold these companies accountable, we need to hold them to that promise, the idea that they will truly be decentralized, that they will open up their APIs and allow the news industry to build on Threads apps that kind of solve the business model that has been failing for so many years now. So while I think it still can be a useful tool, like at this point, I think we can all hold hands and jump together because there really are alternatives, and now is the time to start investing in them. And I think that there's real benefit for all of us in doing that.
That's an individual choice, which I get. I suppose the problem, Mariana, for news organizations involved in news every day is the point you make is as long as the local fire service or the mayor of Tehran or Donald Trump, as he, whoever it may be, is using the platform to diffuse information, we sort of have to be there, right?
Yeah, I was going to say my formula of words would be have to, which sounds a little bit like a hostage situation, but it's kind of like in order to do my job, I have no choice but to be on X because I use it to kind of investigate and interrogate what's going on. I think I do have a choice which I exercise about how frequently I post on there, purely because of the kind of level of hate that it often triggers. Whereas if I post on other social media platforms, I just don't receive that in the same way. In fact, you get people who are sending you really important things that they've spotted or telling you about what's happened to them, and you can go off and investigate. So I think, for now, and particularly in this kind of like massive election year, I will absolutely exist on there, but very much in order to kind of investigate the sorts of stuff that I do. I think sort of particularly just listening to you both talk as well, I just increasingly think that these big social media companies are as, if not more powerful than lots of governments all around the world, and we should be treating them in that way, and we kind of still don't, and we don't demand the level of kind of transparency from them. And I think if Elon Musk were here, which he's obviously not, he'd kind of be thinking, oh, this is just kind of like grumpy mainstream media who hate the fact that I'm trying to replace them and all this kinds of stuff. It's actually not about that. It's about kind of like accountability and investigative reporting and the inability to do so. And I think it actually does sort of symbolize something quite sinister when we're in a place where we're sort of even having to have this discussion.
And what about the alternatives? Okay, there was a little moment of excitement about Mastodon. All these journalists desperately trying to get on and trying to work out what's going on, and most of them sort of leaving pretty quickly. Or not leaving, but just being confused by it or coming to the conclusion it's not a replacement. Then we had the weird scenario of Meta seemed to just copying Twitter, creating this thing, and then saying, we don't really want news here. Blue Sky, I mean, what are the alternatives? Aaron, you're exploring lots of other...
Yeah, well, one feature that Threads has recently rolled out that I think is potentially very powerful is the Fediverse sharing. And so people who are on Mastodon, for instance, can follow people's posts on Threads, and that's part of the decentralization that Zoe was talking about that I think is promising with Threads. For me personally, after I was banned and then restored on X, I contemplated using that as kind of an occasion to bolt from there. But at that time, Threads wasn't even available in the EU, for instance, and so I have a lot of readers all over the world, and it became kind of a business decision where I was using X to still promote my newsletter, to get new readers, get new subscribers, and it still probably is, given the scale, kind of indispensable to my business. But as Zoe kind of touched upon, there isn't really a perfect solution at this point. I mean, for me, I do a lot of video journalism. Blue Sky does not have video functionality at this point. Threads is kind of throttling news, and so after a short period of explosive growth on there, it's been pretty much flatlined for about a year now. So I'm not really seeing kind of the new followers that are kind of the lifeblood of trying to grow a newsletter on that platform. Mastodon is very niche. There just isn't any one platform that's emerged that can kind of supplant what Twitter was, and in some ways still is. And so I'm very open to, bolting once and for all at a certain point, but I don't think we're quite there yet with the alternatives. And so my strategy personally has just been to try to establish toeholds everywhere that I can and kind of see how things evolve over time. But unfortunately, I don't think any of these platforms are without their faults.
So explain to me the point of Threads, because, I mean, it's a Twitter clone, right?
Yeah.
But with the key thing that really made Twitter, which was news, conversation around the news, that everything around it, sort of, not present. So I'm really struggling to understand what they were doing and what the point of it is.
Yeah, I mean, right now they're saying that they basically wanted like a text form of Instagram, which I don't think anyone else in the world wanted, and probably won't work if they don't walk back their current stance. But I think, just taking a couple of steps back to the point of decentralization, and I said this on a panel yesterday, but I think it's a little hard to conceptualize like why that would be a value prop for any of us, but really it's the idea that social media would function more like email, where you could sign up for a provider and an experience that made sense for you, but you could talk seamlessly to someone else who was using not Gmail, but Yahoo. And those two programs could kind of talk to each other without a lot of friction in the way. And I think for us, that's actually a really important value prop, because rather than investing in platforms that, again, like at any moment can kind of tweak the algorithm or change their stance and really hurt our ability to continue to grow our followings, like this is the promise that we can invest in our own platforms and then use a bunch of different services as kind of distribution arms for the services that we actually own and where people can pay us more directly. And so while I think that that's a very different vision of social media from what we've known and what we've aspired to with this kind of idea of the global town square, I also don't know if it's worse. And I think, with this idea that they will open up their APIs and allow developers to build on Threads apps, like this is an idea where the news industry could solve our own kind of problems. Like Threads could continue to make a kind of general experience that speaks to its user base, but as a publication, we could build an app for news junkies and people who wanted to follow journalists in particular. And I think that that's actually really promising. Rather than asking Meta to solve our business model, we can try and solve it ourselves, because time and again, we've asked the platforms to do this and they've done it for a few years and then they've walked away, and I just don't think that that's a reliable strategy moving forward.
Yeah, right, that's a good point. They are not reliable partners for the news industry. Mariana, where have you found the nicest audience outside of Twitter?
Ooh, that's a hard question. I don't know, in some ways I kind of think it's this constant battle with social media that both the bad and the good kind of always come together. So, I experience, I'd say right now, less hate and abuse and trolling on Instagram and TikTok than I do on X. I still experience it a bit, but it is those places where people who want to get in touch with me do, and I really, really like that and value that. And I think when it comes to, one of the brilliant things about social media is the ability to kind of connect with your audience in a way that you probably couldn't before, and for them to share things they're concerned about and for you to kind of go off and investigate and see what's going on. So I do kind of, I don't know, I think that X has lost the ability to kind of do that anymore. And I think that it's important to kind of continue to sort of explore that connection with the audience where you can have it. But yeah, I was actually thinking of when you were talking about looking at your notifications, how you don't see when you get abuse on X. But don't you hate when that thing comes up saying see more, and you know that someone's probably sent you abuse somewhere, but you don't know who it is? I absolutely hate that. So yeah, I think I'll stay for now, but I think I'd maybe quite like it if I wasn't on it anymore.
Brilliant. I think we've got about 5 more minutes, so I'd love to have some questions from the audience, because we've got such a fabulous panel. The gentleman at the front.
Hello, thank you so much. This question of staying there not to get inputs for your journalism, but outputting journalism, I'd like to hear your views, because NPR, as you know, decided to leave. And it made no impact on their traffic to their website. So that seems to suggest something. But the argument about staying in that case is, do you stay to have some decent content in amongst the cesspool, even though at the same time the algorithm is stacked against news, and certainly against news links, and even though the owner is inciting violence against you and so on. So is there then any argument to stay, because aren't you just legitimizing it if you in a playing field, which basically you don't have a chance of putting good content which is going to make a difference?
I planted that question, just to be clear.
I would just say briefly in response to that, that I find that there still is demand for quality journalism on X, even though, as you mentioned, the owner is inciting at least hatred, if not violence, against journalists. I post my newsletter, every edition of it on X, and I still get a lot of people who are complimenting our work, sharing it, and so this is not meant to be a defense of X, but also NPR is maybe a slightly different. I'm not sure that X ever really drove a lot of traffic for them. In my specific case, X was always kind of core to what I was doing. I built a huge following on there. Excuse me. And so I didn't really have the luxury, if I wanted to continue running my business as an independent journalist, to leave. But you raise good questions, and I think the legitimization thing, I think, is a real concern. But we're still at a point in the U.S. where pretty much every member of Congress is posting on X. As was mentioned earlier, public institutions are posting, and so there is kind of a collective action problem for sure, where it'd be great if everybody just stopped and moved on to the next thing, but no one really wants to be the person or the independent journalist to take that step and perhaps sacrifice your business in so doing.
I will say, though, just as a counterpoint to that, and I think it's a totally legitimate point, and I'm also an independent journalist, and I think it's a lot to ask of us to kind of potentially harm our business, but we saw a 2-month drop-off in conversion. When we would post a free story, often we would see a lot of free subscribers convert to paid. For 2 months, that was really stagnant because both me and my partner, Casey Newton, have much larger followings on X than on any other platform. But after those 2 months, we've seen the conversion rate spike back up, and it's exactly where it was before, despite the fact that our followings on Threads and all of the other platforms are continually smaller. And so I think there is potential to not have enormous harm, while at the same time, I get that it's quite scary to take that leap.
Thanks. So the lady on the side, so microphone should be coming around, I think.
Hi, Mitali Mukherjee from the Reuters Institute. I just wanted to quickly explore the relationship between X and governments, and I'll use India as an example. So over the course of the last few months, not just journalists, but really large public movements have happened on Twitter, such as the farmers' protest. What Twitter or X quickly did was ban those handles, banned any content coming out of there, and in the run-up to the elections that are currently underway in India, in most cases, it's the handles of opposition party members that have been banned. On a sort of continuum scale, we've seen mis and disinformation, rape threats, death threats, all of that. But what do you think it could get, where do you think it could worsen to in terms of the relationship between X and authoritarian regimes?
Zoe, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the most blatant walk back of Elon Musk's stance on free speech, because to stand up to authoritarian governments, it takes an enormous amount of legal firepower, and we've simply seen time and again that he is not willing to take that stance. He'll say things like, oh, well, would you rather, Twitter just be banned in India in entirety? And the answer is that under a previous regime, under previous ownership, the company was willing to be banned for a short period of time and fight those court orders in order to not simply acquiesce to authoritarian governments. And we saw most recently in Brazil, he said he was going to take that stance, and he walked it back 2 days later. I think the idea that Elon is a free speech absolutist, all of us at the very beginning thought, well, you can be a free speech absolutist, but what about CSAM, and what about government requests, and what about death threats? And I think, all of these platforms end up in the same space, but I think it's very worrying to watch how Twitter is going to act in India and Turkey and Brazil and in these markets where the easier thing to do is simply to listen to the government, and that is what Elon Musk has been doing. I think the compliance rate with government takedown requests used to be about 50%, it's spiked to about 80% under the current regime.
Thanks. We probably got time for one more question, I think. I think the lady just on the left here.
Hi. My question is, Zoe, you've already kind of sort of made the argument for leaving, but for the rest of you, what would be a sort of tipping point, sort of cliff edge beyond which you'd leave and you'd sort of never look back?
That's a very good question. I think that if I'm really honest, for me, while it continues to be a place where it's part of my job to investigate what's going on and how it's unfolding, there's kind of no tipping point. I mean, I've already received like death threats, rape threats, the most kind of extreme abuse. It's almost like you're sort of like, well, I don't know, see how much worse it can get. And so I kind of feel as though, and for me, I kind of think about it in these terms, which is particularly lots of the kind of reporting and investigations I've chatted through in this panel, they are about sticking up for real people who are being harmed by this stuff. And that is absolutely my job to do that and to interrogate the harm caused to them. And I think while that continues to happen, I have to keep doing that regardless of the consequences. And you'd hope it might reach a point where it's less harmful to those individuals, or rather that maybe it doesn't exist in the same way and then you don't use it in that way. But yeah, I think there's probably no tipping point.
And what I would say from a sort of news organization's point of view, I mean, there are two separate usages here of Twitter, aren't there? There's the journalists and individuals engaging in conversation, contact building, and so on. And then there is the use of the platform, as I said at the beginning, as a kind of giant fax machine. So there's the voyeur element of, which is incredibly important in news gathering. You're like, okay, when is this person going to give a statement? Where are we going to do it? It might well be on that platform. You have to be monitoring that platform and you have to be engaging in the content on that platform. So I guess, as Mariana said, until the local police force and the fire station and everybody, goes somewhere else, as journalists, you're obligated to keep looking for information, even on platforms that are full of misinformation, which is ironic. I'm being cut, censored. She's working for Elon Musk. Thank you so much, Chiara. Thank you very much, everybody, and thanks to the wonderful panel. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. That's great. Thank you. Hi. Yes.
Of course you can. I guess like many of us also
To get out?
Yes.
We'll
chat to you
can
then.
go there.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Vivi l'Umbria, sulla politica di coesione dell'Unione Europea.
Oh, yeah.